Chapter 2 of The Bat. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Alan Winterroud. The Bat by Mary Roberts Reinhardt. Chapter 2. The Indomitable Miss Van Gorder. Miss Cornelius Van Gorder, indomitable spinster, last bearer of a name which had been great in New York when New York was a red-roofed New Amsterdam, and Peter Stuyvesant a parvenu, sat propped up in bed in the green room of her newly rented country house, reading the morning newspaper. Thus seen, with an old soft Paisley shawl tucked in about her thin shoulders, and without the stately gray transformation that adorned her on less intimate occasions, she looked much less formidable and more innocently placid than those could ever have imagined who had only felt the bite of her tart wit at such functions as the state Van Gorder dinners. Patrician to her fingertips, independent to the roots of her hair, she preserved at 65 a humorous and quenchless curiosity in regard to every side of life, which even the full and crowded years that already lay behind her had not entirely satisfied. She was an age and an attitude, but she was more than that. She had grown old without growing dull or losing touch with youth. Her face had the delicate strength of a fine cameo, and her mild and youthful heart preserved an innocent zest for adventure. Wide travel, social leadership, the world of art and books, a dozen charities, an existence rich with diverse experience, all these she had enjoyed energetically and to the full, but she felt, with ingenuous vanity, that there were still sides to her character which even these had not brought to light. As a little girl she had hesitated between wishing to be a locomotive engineer or a famous bandit, and when she had found at 7 that the accident of sex would probably debar her from either occupation, she had resolved fiercely that some time before she died she would show the world in general, and the Van Gorder clan in particular, that a woman was quite as capable of dangerous exploits as a man. So far her life, while exciting enough at moments, had never actually been dangerous, and time was slipping away, without giving her an opportunity to prove her hardiness of heart. Whenever she thought of this, the fact annoyed her extremely, and she thought of it now. She threw down the morning paper disgustedly. Here she was at 65, rich, safe, settled for the summer in a delightful country place with a good cook, excellent servants, beautiful gardens and grounds, everything as respectable and comfortable as a limousine. And out in the world, people were murdering and robbing each other, floating over Niagara Falls in barrels, rescuing children from burning houses, taming tigers, going to Africa to hunt gorillas, doing all sorts of exciting things. She could not float over Niagara Falls in a barrel. Lizzie Allen, her faithful old maid, would never let her. She could not go to Africa to hunt gorillas. Sally Ogden, her sister, would never let her hear the last of it. She could not even, as she certainly would if she were a man, try and track down this terrible creature, the Bat. She sniffed disgruntledly. Things came to her much too easily. Take this very house she was living in. 10 days ago she had decided on the spur of the moment, a decision suddenly crystallized by a weariness of charitable committees and the noise and heat of New York, to take a place in the country for the summer. It was late in the renting season. Even the ordinary difficulties of finding a suitable spot would have added some spice to the quest, but this ideal place had practically fallen into her lap, with no trouble or search at all. Courtleigh Fleming, president of the Union Bank, who had built the house on a scale of comfortable magnificence. Courtleigh Fleming had died suddenly in the West when Miss Van Gorder was beginning her house hunting. The day after his death her agent had called her up. Richard Fleming, Courtleigh Fleming's nephew and heir, was anxious to rent the Fleming house at once. If she made a quick decision it was hers for the summer, at a bargain. Miss Van Gorder had decided at once. She took an innocent pleasure in bargains. The next day the keys were hers, the servants engaged to stay on. Within a week she had moved. All very pleasant and easy, no doubt. Adventure? Pooh! And yet she could not really say that her move to the country had brought her no adventures at all. There had been things. Last night the lights had gone off unexpectedly, and Billy, the Japanese butler and handyman, had said that he had seen a face at one of the kitchen windows, a face that vanished when he went to the window. Servants' nonsense, probably, but the servants seemed unusually nervous for people who were used to the country. And Lizzie, of course, had sworn that she had seen a man trying to get up the stairs, but Lizzie could grow hysterical over a creaking door. Still, it was queer. And what had that affable Dr. Wells said to her? "I respect your courage, Miss Van Gorder, moving out into the Bat's home country, you know." She picked up the paper again. There was a map of the scene of the Bat's most recent exploits, and yes, 3 of his recent crimes had been within a 20-mile radius of this very spot. She thought it over and gave a little shudder of pleasurable fear. Then she dismissed the thought with a shrug. No chance. She might live in a lonely house 2 miles from the railroad station all summer long, and the Bat would never disturb her. Nothing ever did. She had skimmed through the paper hurriedly. Now a headline caught her eye. Failure of Union Bank? Wasn't that the bank which Courtleigh Fleming had been president? She settled down to read the article, but it was disappointingly brief. The Union Bank had closed its doors. The cashier, a young man named Bailey, was apparently under suspicion. The article mentioned Courtleigh Fleming's recent and tragic death in the best vein of newspaperese. She laid down the paper and thought. Bailey. Bailey. She seemed to have a vague recollection of hearing about a young man named Bailey who worked in a bank, but she could not remember where or by whom his name had been mentioned. Well, it didn't matter. She had other things to think about. She must ring for Lizzie. Get up and dress. The bright morning sun, streaming in through the long window, made lying in bed an old woman's luxury, and she refused to be an old woman. Though the worst old woman I ever knew was a man, she thought with a satirical twinkle. She was glad Sally's daughter, young Dale Ogden, was here in the house with her. The companionship of Dale's bright youth would keep her from getting old womanish if anything could. She smiled, thinking of Dale. Dale was a nice child, her favorite niece. Sally didn't understand her, of course, but Sally wouldn't. Sally read newspaper articles on the younger generation and its wild ways. Sally doesn't remember when she was a younger generation herself, thought Miss Cornelia, but I do, and if we didn't have automobiles, we had buggies, and youth doesn't change its ways just because it has cut its hair. Before Mr. and Mrs. Ogden left for Europe, Sally had talked to her sister Cornelia long and weightily on the problem of Dale. Problem of Dale, indeed, thought Miss Cornelia scornfully. Dale's the nicest thing I've seen in some time. She'd be 10 times happier if Sally wasn't always trying to marry her off to some young snip with more of what fools call eligibility than brains. But there, Cornelia Van Gorder, Sally's given you your innings by rampaging off to Europe and leaving Dale with you all summer, and you've a lot less sense than I flatter myself you have if you can't give your favorite niece a happy vacation from all her immediate family, and maybe find her someone who will make her happy for good and all in the bargain. Miss Cornelia was an incorrigible matchmaker. Nevertheless, she was more concerned with the problem of Dale than she would have admitted. Dale, at her age, with her charm and beauty, why, she ought to behave as if she were walking on air, thought her aunt worriedly. And instead, she acts more as if she were walking on pins and needles. She seems to like being here. I know she likes me. I'm pretty sure she's just as pleased to get a little holiday from Sally and Harry. She amuses herself. She falls in with any plan I want to make, and yet Dale was not happy. Miss Cornelia felt sure of it. It isn't natural for a girl to seem so lackluster and quiet at her age, and she's nervous, too, as if something were preying on her mind, particularly these last few days. If she were in love with somebody Sally didn't approve of particularly, well, that would account for it, of course. But Sally didn't say anything that would make me think that, or Dale either, though I don't suppose Dale would, yet, even to me. I haven't seen so much of her in these last 2 years. Then Miss Cornelia's mind seized upon a sentence in a hurried flow of her sister's last instructions. A sentence that had passed almost unnoticed at the time. Something about Dale and an unfortunate attachment But of course, Cornelia dear, she's